I suggest we start. Hello, hi. Thank you for joining my session called 10 Tips to Become an Awesome Technical Lead. My name is Bart Blommaerts. I'm a hands-on application architect. I live and work in Belgium at a company called Ordina, more specifically in our business unit that's called JWorks. Within JWorks, we mainly do Java and JavaScript. If you want to follow me on Twitter, if you have any questions for me or just random thoughts, you can always find me via that Twitter handle. Now, before I get started, I actually have a couple of questions for you guys because I like to get to know the audience. So who here in the room is currently working as a senior developer? Okay. And who is currently a technical lead? So you have a couple of people working for you in a project team. Okay, about 40%, I think. And then related to that, who has ever worked with a technical lead, somebody holding that position? Maybe like 20%, a bit less. Okay, good. If I want to give any tips relating to technical leadership, it's probably good that I start with explaining what I understand with technical leadership. I believe that the technical lead has a responsibility to help a team move forward towards a successful project. So in general, the person who is assigned as a technical lead has a strong technical background, but also has strong communication skills. He or she will be accountable for the technical direction of the project and to be the go-to person for cross-team interactions. So let's dive a bit into details. Technical guidance. So when it comes to medium to large projects, I think that it's quite common to have a full-time technical lead on a project. And one of its responsibilities is to guide the project towards a technical vision. So for example, what technology are we going to use, what frameworks, what libraries, how will we deliver the project, what will be our deployment pipelines, and things like that. Another important part of its responsibilities are risk and requirements. So obviously, when we are talking about analyzing risks, it's about mitigating risks. I'll give another example. A new version of a technology comes out, it's very interesting. You learn it at this conference, you really want to use it. What will be the risks if we start implementing that into production? What will be the impact? And requirements will be how will the technology that we're building meet certain business requirements, business demands? Coaching is also a very important part for the technical lead role. So in general, most teams will have like a mixed level of experience within the team, and that makes a lot of sense. Just from a cost perspective, it's not sensible to have like all technical, very experienced guys. So there will be people who have less experience with the technology or who just come from school and things like that. And then finally, it is about communication. So bridging the communication between all the stakeholders, the business stakeholders, teams that you need to work together with, and of course then your own team that you're leading. Because in general, business stakeholders have less technical background than most of you guys, so you'll need to be able to bridge that communication gap between your technical skills, your team, and then the business stakeholders. Now, a question that you could ask yourself is, do we really need a technical lead? And there's actually quite a lot of information on this on the internet. If you just Google it, you will find tons and tons of articles. So you could argue against the role. You could say that, well, if you have a team of well-functioning developers, you can make decisions yourself, you can prioritize work, you can sit together with business and then create the project. And this would be like in an ideal world, this would be possible. I have not seen that yet, unfortunately. Do we really need a technical lead? I don't. It's maybe you don't need a technical lead. Everything is awesome. If you have seen the Lego movie, I have two little boys at home, so I've seen it a couple of times. You will see that everything is awesome is actually not always true. Even when these perfect conditions exist, this is like a very delicate balance. You can have developers openly discussing alternatives, finding a consensus and moving forwards, but it doesn't take a lot for the situation to go wrong. I mean, everybody has been in discussions, I think, in project, right? So even if you have really well-functional teams where people share responsibilities, there is also the second part that the business will come to you and they will be looking for a single point of contact. They will be looking for somebody to mediate discussions. And you will see that in projects, new people will be hired. And unfortunately, people also will leave the project, and you need to cope with that. Bear in mind that the technical lead is just a role, and it's I think more important to make sure that the responsibilities of the role get fulfilled than to discuss about the actual role in itself. Like with any leadership role, a bad technical lead can actually make things worse. So I recognize that, and I hope that with these tips we can prevent this from happening. Now there's two sides to the story. It's a technical leadership role. So there's a technical part and there's the leadership part. And I will give tips for both of these. And we are going to start with the technical part because I think after lunch that's what most people are craving for, some technology. One thing that I care a lot about is like advocate for change. And this means installing a mindset of positive evolution. I will give a couple of examples about that. So imagine that progress is slow within your project. It can be cumbersome. It can just be plain stupid. If you have worked with large corporations, you probably have seen stupid. So you should see that and try to turn that around. How can we do this? Well, one way to do this is with a process called OODA. OODA means observe, orient, decide, and act. This is actually also called the Deming cycle. And this can really help you to become an advocate of change. So the first phase is the observation phase, where you will be looking at the project and things that are not working efficiently in the project. So for example, you have a test that sometimes fails. I mean, everybody has seen a test that sometimes fails. And you can say, we'll run it again, and then probably the next time it will work. Same goes for builds. If you have CI/CD, just click on the play icon again in Jenkins, and maybe it will work. So everybody has seen these, I'm sure. That's an observation, something that's not efficiently working in the team. And then you can move to the second phase, which is the orientation phase, where you'll be looking at that particular problem and use your experience or use communication or use conferences like these to cope with that specific problem. How can we solve it? And you can find a couple of alternatives for that, and then we move on to the decision phase. Okay, how will we be coping with this particular problem? Who will we make responsible to look at like the failing builds? This might be you, might be somebody else in the team as well. And then obviously, after you have made that decision, you need to act on it. And the really cool part about the OODA is that it's a re-entrant feedback loop. So if you make certain decisions or you act on your decision, you can actually make new observations the next time and like this continuously evolve. So I believe that you also always should be looking for pain within the team. That might sound kind of strange, but if you have like the state of mind to continuously improve things, the project will be more efficient, and the people in your project team, the developers, will be happier, and everybody likes happy developers, right? Now, to make sure that you can make the correct observations, I believe that the technical role, the technical lead, is an integral part of the team. So it's not somebody who's outside of the team that sometimes comes at looking at a couple of things. It's like somebody who is in the team, part of the team, who seeks out certain issues to prevent good teamwork. So I'm a really big fan of this like continuous evolution. So I actually want to do it in my presentation as well. So welcome to this presentation that's called 11 Tips to Become an Awesome Technical Lead. And the second one is work through failure and success. Things will fail. Builds will break, code will crash, null pointers will happen. If you saw the keynote from Yegor and his talk, you know that null pointers are just like a common thing, and they will happen, unfortunately. Oh, sorry. Now, when these mistakes happen, don't look for somebody to blame. Don't look for somebody guilty. You are the technical lead. You should take responsibility. And look for a solution for that. Again, making observations about the failing build and trying to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Something that I really like to make sure of is that a bug, for example, never needs to be fixed twice. Because then you probably have taken the wrong decision based on the observations and the orientation that you did. If you look back at the previous point, it's important that we learn from the mistakes that we make so that in the future things will be better. Celebrate success. I think that is also a very important one. I believe that when a team has a certain sense of achievement, that they will perform better. They will be happier with what they're doing. They will be highly motivated, and they will be the best developer that they can be. And celebrating success is not always easy. I'll give you a personal example. By the end of last year, we were doing a project for a certain customer in Belgium, and whilst we were nearing the deadline, we saw that we really had a lot of work to do. So the developers worked really hard. Lots of young guys on the project, guys and girls, and they made it. They made it to the end. So we were doing the presentation for the customer, and the customer was actually really happy. Oh, this is exactly what we want. You did such a good job. So we were really satisfied. And on that same day, the customer came back to us and said, well, you know, management doesn't like it. Management has decided that we're actually not going to put it into production. And if that's the moment that you've been waiting for like a celebration, well, that's very unfortunate. Especially since the team worked very hard and did really an amazing job. So I believe you should also celebrate the small things. So for example, when a sprint is completed successfully, or when a feature is been built, you should celebrate then. And also, it's about congratulating the team. So it can be having a drink on Fridays, or maybe a small lunch or something like that. Trust me, if you go to the customer, go to management and ask for budget for those kind of things, they will be happy to assist you, at least in my experience. You need to sell it to them. And what's also really important is congratulate individuals. So when somebody comes up to you and he has a really great idea, and you decide, okay, let's follow his idea, let's follow this new technology. Again, maybe something you saw at this conference. And if it turns out that it was a good idea and it makes progress, then you should really congratulate that individual person as well, because it will be visible for everybody in the team. You will get like a great sense of achievement, and that sense of achievement will lead to creativity, to people standing up and giving you solutions for certain problems. So this is really out-of-the-box thinking. You should be well celebrated. And now I'm going to have a sip of water. The next step, I believe, is a very important one. It is stay technical. As I mentioned in the introduction, you likely became the technical lead because you have, well, at least convinced somebody that you're up for the job. And the technical lead is generally a seasoned developer, so you're technically very strong. But being a technical lead is not only about technology. You also have non-coding responsibilities, like talking to management or to the customer. So I believe that you need to stay technical, and well, the best way to stay technical is to write code. Maybe do proof of concept. You could also do reviews for other people's code, and also make sure that somebody reviews your code as well. And then you should try to establish a technical vision. And you should be sure that everybody in the team knows what the technical vision is. And the best way to achieve this is just to make sure that everybody works together on the technical vision. Incorporate people in defining your technical vision, and make sure that everybody knows how they personally are contributing to that technical vision. And of course, make sure that the technical vision is in line with the business requirements. Probably even more important than continue on coding is making sure that you stay up to date on the evolution of the code base in your project, because there will be moments where people are like cutting corners to make it till the end of the sprint. That can be fine, but just make sure that you do something about it, that you're aware of everything that's continuously happening within your projects. The next one is always available. That's actually a pretty difficult one. So as a technical lead, you should try to be always available for questions, for options, for support, for guidance, things like that, because you will have other responsibilities. So what I'd like to do is upfront write out the amount of time that I want to be spending on certain things. So for example, the technical design, I want to spend a certain percentage of my time on that. Technical design, for example, is writing out what you want the team to implement, or what you want to implement yourself, looking at technical guidelines and making sure that certain rules are being used within the team. The next one is business. Make sure that you talk to your customer, to your clients, to make sure that whatever it's you're building, it is what they want you to build, so that the system will actually be used in production, not like the example I had earlier. Project management, which I find the least interesting part about the technical lead role. It's defining user stories. It's making sure that they are estimated, following up on these. And then finally, it's the code. Now, don't really look very closely at the numbers in here. This is like just a starting point. It will depend on the maturity of your team. It will depend on the project that you're building. And what's also very important is that you evaluate what's going on with these numbers. You should look at, okay, how much of my time am I spending on these particular parts? And if it turns out that you're spending all your time with project management, or your time talking to business, and you don't have any time for coding or for technical design, you can probably cope with that. Maybe you need a business analyst for your project, or maybe you need a really dedicated project manager or a scrum master. But in the end, be realistic. When people come up to you and start asking you questions, you don't need to be able to answer anything at once. First reason for that is because you won't get any actual work done. I learned that the hard way. And also because some things they might just be too difficult to reply to ad hoc. So just ask for some time. Say, okay, I will look into that. Just make sure that you actually come back to the original guy who asked, or girl who asked the questions. And also try to connect people. So it's perfectly possible that you, for example, don't know a lot about the particular problem that's happening, but somebody else in the team is able to solve that for you. Make sure that you can connect these people, also when it's across teams. And I believe while time management is not the easiest part of the role, you will become better at doing that. Be a mentor for your team is the next tip. I believe that the word mentor has a couple of meanings. It's about mediation. That was actually Dutch. It's about mediation. So when discussion happens, you should try to make sure that also something comes out of that discussion. It's actually really good to have discussions within a team, because if people are making the effort to discuss about a certain topic, it means that they're passionate about your project, about their craft. They want to add something to the project. So discussion is really something that you should try to embrace, and you should try to also make sure that there is always a consensus when no decisions are reached, or when it's difficult to reach a decision. It's not always possible. So if you can't make a consensus, if you can't measure the pros and the cons, and in the end a decision is necessary at that moment in time, then it will be up to you as a technical lead to make the decision and to be responsible for that. The next one is mentoring in itself. By mentoring, I mean be a teacher for your people, for your developers. I personally tend to do this in the same fashion all the time. So when somebody new at the project starts, whether it's like a seasoned developer or just somebody who left school, I will try to do code reviews of every commit that they do. I will try to do that. And I will be very picky. I will be giving comments on a lot of details. I will be writing tests that that cause null pointers. This will not make you very popular. But I also will try why I'm being so picky about this, to make sure that people know why they're being forced to work on the story again. Because in time, they will adopt these principles that you're using. So for example, if you really care about single responsibility principle, explain them why this is important and why they're not adhering to this principle. People will really learn also from the explanation that you give. As I said, might not make you the most popular guy in the room, but it will be beneficial for the project, and in time people will understand that as well. Effective delegation. I believe that the technical lead should not be taking all the decisions at all. I believe that the team will adopt certain best practices if you explain them correctly, and you might be able to give ownership to certain members of the team. For example, saying, okay, you can pick up this user story and you take full ownership over it, or look at this technical issue that we're facing. And by transferring ownership to people within the team, they will also be very motivated to do a great job, and you will be a bit relieved of that part of the job. So don't try to own all the responsibilities. Just try to make sure that somebody takes up that responsibility. Matching goals. you should try to match the goals of the individual developers with the goals of the project or the organization that you're working with. And this is like what I like to call specifically targeted for individuals, what they want to achieve, and it's also dynamic because the goals of the individual developers, they will change over time. So if you have somebody that wants to also become a technical lead in the future, just pass some of the responsibilities to that guy and coach him to make sure that he can grow in that role. Another thing that you can also do is just share my slide deck, and then they might also become better technical leads. So in all of the previous tasks, communication is really important, but matching goals is probably even more important because it will really make people feel valued. And then last one on this slide is about optimizing for the group. You're optimizing for your project team. It is your team that needs to deliver something of value to the customer. And the individuals are very important in that. But if there's like discrepancies and you can't find a solution and you need to make a decision, then make sure that you make a decision for the team, for the project, for what you're trying to achieve. In teams that evolve, in teams that collaborate well, they will also perform better. And members in teams like that, they will be happy members and will be happy to work on your project. So know when to give input, know when to make decisions, but also know when to step back and allow the team to take ownership themselves. So the last time I'm going to say it, I've repeated it a couple of times, you don't need to take all of the technical decisions yourself. Share ownership, give responsibility, but always stay accountable for what's going on. Surround yourself with other technical leads. When I asked the question, we saw that there were like 40% of you guys here in the room that currently have the role of technical leads, but only 20% have ever worked with a technical lead. So that's kind of strange, but we see that a lot. And there's two reasons why I call surrounding yourself with other technical leads makes a lot of sense. So there's like the personal level and there's the organizational level. On a personal level, it's just important so that you can learn from each other. For example, how do you cope with giving input to your developers without coming across like being a very, very bossy or a very dominant person? And how do your peers share their time between the leadership functions and the technical functions? Now, it is very important that you just don't adopt what you learn from your peers without questioning the reasoning, the reason why they are spending that much time on certain tasks, because every project is different, and that's very important. Every project team is different as well. On an organizational level, you should look if there's like a clearly understood overarching objective. So you might be working on a smaller part of the application or of the system. There will be other parts and you need to make sure that these consistently can work together. There may be some kind of overarching architecture, and these architectures don't necessarily always are very consistent. So the project that I'm doing right now is a very cool project. We're doing microservices, we're deploying stateless 12-factor apps to Docker containers in Kubernetes. It's a really cool technology. But at the same time, we need to integrate with the magic box in the basement, which is the mainframe. So there's a lot of state over there, and we are stateless. So how will we work together from that? And then there are dependencies regarding projects and regarding team members. So for example, many organizations have a dedicated team related to security. So we might need that particular guy who can implement like the two-way SSL for us. And he's not always available. Another dependency that you can have is regarding other projects. So for example, just last week, there was a project that wanted to go into production, but they actually have a very strong dependency on what we're doing, which is kind of annoying because we don't even have a production environment yet. So these problems you will need to cope with. You are not alone. This might sound a bit corny, but this actually makes a lot of sense. When you're in an organization and you see that other technical leads or people are looking for advice, are looking for somebody to get some feedback from, you should try to step up, even if that particular person is not in your team, not in your organization, or maybe not even working for the same customer. A very important part of a technical lead is also your networking abilities, and by stepping up and talking to people, you will become better at that. I've interviewed a lot of people, especially at my previous job. And this can be very rewarding. You know, when you get it right, like a very good match, the guy really likes working for your project, does a great job over there, but you will also get it wrong. And I will give you some tips to avoid to getting it wrong. Know your goal. I don't know if that guy is famous here in Riga. It's Bumba. My 4-year-old really loves him. But the Bumba and the Cirque du Soleil, they have similarities, right? But I'm pretty sure that the employees of both organizations are not really interchangeable. So when you're doing an interview, it's important that you know why you are interviewing for. This means that if some manager comes up to you and say, "Oh, you have an interview in 5 minutes, I don't know anything about the guy, I will quickly send his resume," decline. I really hate that kind of approach. And you will actually be valued by management if you're honest and saying, "Okay, we can't do an interview like this." So differences can be if you are hiring somebody to work on your projects, and he can maybe need him for a very short amount of time, saying, "Okay, just we want to increase the current velocity in our project." That's one case. Another case can be, "Okay, we're looking for somebody to hire for like the remainder of the year or for 2 years." That's a really different approach. Just a little side remark, if you have read The Mythical Man Month by Fred Brooks, you will also have known that 2 women cannot deliver a baby in less than 9 months. So be realistic when you're talking about increasing the velocity of your team. The first thing that you get when you're interviewing somebody is generally their resume. And when you're looking at the resume, I think it's important that you start looking for patterns. So for example, is this person somebody who likes to work on short projects? Some people prefer that, while other people prefer something for the longer term. Both are fine, both can be useful, but it depends on what you're looking for in your project. Now, this does not have to be a blocking issue, but it's something that you can talk with the interviewee about, so that's very important. Another thing is like patterns in frameworks that you use. So for example, if you have somebody who really just needs to increase the bandwidth in a project, then it's useful if he has experience with related technologies. But if you have somebody who's in there for the longer term, it's more important that you look at the eagerness to learn, or the ability to pick up new things. And that's something that I like to call like the mindset of a developer. And that's something that I'm always looking for when I'm doing an interview. Does this person have like a logical approach to certain situations, to certain questions? Will he consider alternatives? How will he go through the decision-making process to choose for, okay, we're going to use annotations for this, or we're going to write it out? Why is there a difference? This is, in my opinion, the most important slide in the slide deck. Do not use Stack Overflow to find questions. Stack Overflow can be very useful. I probably visit Stack Overflow like everybody else in the room a couple of times every day. But I really discourage it if you're looking for questions to ask to people you're interviewing. There are a lot of topics on this, and in general, they're coming up with questions that are not really useful for you. I mean, don't go asking questions if you need to look at Stack Overflow for the answer. Look at questions that make sense for the project that you're doing. So in my opinion, most of these topics on Stack Overflow are just bad advice. Make sure that you ask something about your project, about what you are trying to achieve. Everybody probably read the story about the engineer who went to the customs in the United States and needed to sort the binary tree. Unless that's what you're doing, don't ask people how to sort a binary tree. Now, it's very easy to say what you should not be doing, but I also would like to share what is my pattern when I interview somebody. So first, I try to make people at ease. In general, most people will have a tendency to be a bit nervous for an interview. That's perfectly normal. So I will start with like a very simple question. And I actually start every interview with the exact same question. And that question is, explain to me what is the difference between an abstract class and an interface. While many of you might think that's a really stupid question, everybody knows that, right? You would be really surprised by the answers you get over there. It will teach you a lot about the guy or the girl that you're interviewing. And immediately related to that is like offer options. Some people like the theoretical answer. Other people prefer to sketch something on a whiteboard or write something in pseudocode. Just prepare for that as well. All the different options are valid, because it will, again, make people more comfortable. But but you should prepare that for that. If you like doing an interview, for example, you need, I think, a meeting room that has a whiteboard. And then the next step is you build on their response and start asking more difficult questions. Okay, how did you handle this problem in the past? And again, look at problems that you have faced or are facing in your project yourself. Fourth point is show interest. So a genuine interest in what they have done in the past. It will make people more at ease because they can talk about something that they have done. And they will it will be easier for them to share information with you. And by sharing this information with you, you also know more about the potential candidates. It will give you insights in their way of thinking and their way of working. And then 5, the bonus question. If all goes well, you should look at like a very difficult question, something that you've experienced in the project, and say, okay, I have a bonus question for you. You should explicitly say that up front. It's okay if you don't know it. I mean, we needed to look for it for 2 days before we found a solution, and then ask them that question. That can be really valuable to know how strong they might work within your team. Also mention that they don't really need to get it right. Now, these questions, they are technical in nature, but they will teach you a tremendous amount of things about the candidates. And it's important that you always stay polite. If the candidate does not match with your specific goals, stay polite and don't send them home with a bad feeling. That's just not very pleasant. Tip number 8, embrace cultural difference. And I'm very curious how this slide shows up over there. So this green thing over there, that's Belgium. So just to give you an idea of the scale where we're operating in. All people, all different. After the conference, we all go home to live different lives. Some people are married, some people are kids, some people don't have kids, are not married. And again, this is incredibly valuable because all of your users, they will be different too. Your business will also be different kinds of people. So when people have different opinions, like I said earlier, you should embrace that and make sure that you use it to make the project better. Because in the end, you're all working to the same end goal. And the end goal is a working system for your customer. And I believe that you should surround yourself with passionate people, because the project will benefit from it, and you will also personally be benefit from that. You will learn from other people's way of working. And then a particular slide regarding offshore. Offshore can be sometimes more difficult because, for example, if there are different time zones, there's both a pro and a con to that, because it means that if there's like a huge difference in time, actual work will be done while you're sleeping, which is really good. But on the other hand, communication will be more difficult. So when teams are really shattered all over the world, I think that it's nice to sometimes like do night shift, because then you will be able to directly communicate with the people who are across the globe, and you will show respect for them as well. And developers work better at night anyway. So communication. Communication can be very difficult because communication is very tight with the cultures. And the best example for that is the word yes. If you have ever worked with different cultures, you know that yes means something else at some places. Yes can mean no. When I found out this first, I did really bad, so I found it out the hard way. But it's actually a very easy problem to cope with. You can just make it explicit. Yes, I get the requirements. Yes, I will do that implementation in that manner. And regarding communication, instant messaging will also help tremendously. Whether it's Slack, if you like threads, or it's HipChat, or it's whatever, make sure that you have one of these in place. This also works for onshore teams, but with an onshore team, you just can yell at somebody if they broke something. And integrate your tooling with, for example, your CI/CD pipeline, or with your bug tracker and things like that. So that can give you a really helpful. Prepare work. Just like you prepare work for your onshore team or for yourself. But when you're working with an offshore team, it's important to spend a bit more time in the preparation of the work, because if you're writing out the user stories, for example, chances are this might be their main way of getting information from you. It will be more difficult for them to communicate directly with the customer or even with you, so make sure that you spend enough time on writing these user stories, or have somebody do that for you. And then a very important one is everybody is part of the team. I have seen project managers that really treat offshore developers like cheap labor, and that's really annoying. Unfortunately, it happens. And I have to say that some of the offshore people I've worked with were like one of the best people that I ever worked with. You will have people who don't perform well in offshore, but you also have people who don't perform well who are in your office. So just treat everybody equally. But I also really mean that, treat everybody equally. So when you feel like yelling at somebody in your own team, you can actually be pretty rude on instant messaging as well. Let that not be the only takeaway from this talk, but just treat everybody the same. Because you will only benefit from it. Tip number 9, estimating. Who in the room often needs to estimate projects? About 70% of you? Good. I would like to start with a quote from Douglas Hofstadter. Not exactly sure how to pronounce that. It's Hofstadter's law, and it says, it always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstadter's law. Now, estimating is hard. When you do it more often, you will get better at it, but yeah, you will still get it wrong from time to time. Mastering estimation is a lifelong journey. It will set you apart, and it will make sure that people look at you like somebody very professional who is stable and can deliver quality work, but it is hard. And I think there are a couple of approaches to this. Planning poker, for example. Who in the room is doing agile projects, so Scrum or Kanban? 60% of you? Okay. We will have a discussion afterwards. When you're doing planning poker, the entire team can work together on the estimation. If you don't know what planning poker is, I will give a very quick introduction. Everybody gets these kind of cards with numbers on them. And there will be somebody who will explain the user story, so the business requirement that you will be implementing. And then when the explanation is done, he or she will typically count down, like 3 to 1, and then you play your cards. And then the number on the card will give like a rough idea of how difficult or how much time it will cost to implement something. And when you have a Scrum team around you, and everybody plays like very similar cards, then you can be confident that the estimation will be good enough. If you have somebody who plays a very high card and somebody else who plays a very low card, then you should give them the possibility to explain why they're playing that cards. Maybe somebody knows something about the project. For example, you have a really bad data model in the database, and if you want this kind of query, well, it will be very difficult. While somebody else can say, oh yes, but I actually have already done that query, something very similar, and we can learn from that. So this is allowing reasoning about the estimation, giving people the opportunity to say why they are giving a certain vote. I skipped 2. So the first one is defining a sequence. While I think it's very obvious, you need to make sure that everybody understands the sequence in which the numbers are played. Often Fibonacci is used, but most of the cards can also have different sequences. The sequence in itself is totally unimportant, just to make sure that everybody knows what sequence that you're using, and you need to set a baseline. A lot of the time, I think most people actually do that. They define their one-story user story, and I'm not particularly happy with a one-point user story, because it will be quite difficult to estimate smaller things. So the granularity becomes more difficult. I prefer having my baseline to be like a 10-point user story. Then you can always go lower. Because in the end, the numbers in themselves is just something for your team. It doesn't really, it's not something that you can compare with other teams, or should be comparing with other teams. And then uncertainty is normal. I mean, if uncertainty was never existing, then, well, probably our job would have been a lot more easy. But things will evolve, database schemas will act up, so it's normal. And when this happens, it should lead to higher estimations. This uncertainty should be part of your estimation. Something very simple to give an example. You need to implement a third-party service, and you have actually no clue what they're exposing. Are they doing REST? Are they doing SOAP? Are they doing crazy technology? Then it's uncertain. And there's 2 ways of dealing with that. So the first one is you go talk to your business owner and say, okay, we need to do this, we probably can do it, but we have no clue how, so it will take a longer amount of time. Or you can do a little more preparation work, like a technical design, where you look at, okay, by examining the endpoint from the users, we know that they're doing JSON over HTTP. It's not completely REST, they don't use verbs, but it will be easier for us to implement. Then the second part is about solutioning. The monkey is my favorite one. As a technical lead, you will often will need to do estimations before you're actually building something. And this, or for example, as a response to an RFP, so a request for proposal. And this can be used by management or by the business to make sure if they want to implement something. What I like to do for that is 3-point estimates. So if you look at the formula above, you can calculate the weighted mean by having an optimistic estimate, a best guess estimate, and a pessimistic estimate. And then there will be a number that comes from that formula that will give you a pretty good idea of where it's headed. There will be unknown unknowns, so things that you're not aware of. Things will happen, Murphy will happen. So, but also it's very important, I think, is that you do an estimation for the team that actually will be performing the work. And actually, I've added this couple of bullet points that you need to add a certain percentage for things that go wrong, for testing, for debugging, for polishing. So you're estimating for a real project, most likely. You're not telling people what the quickest ways that you personally can do something in the best possible conditions. So this is not hacking something together, this is like a real estimate. Don't focus too much on the 20, just add a percentage for testing, for debugging, and for in general for like what the fuck moments. Can you say fucking Riga? I already did it twice, so fuck it. Anyway, don't fear estimating. Any estimate is better than no estimate at all. And if people come up to you and say, oh, this is really crazy, there's no way that we can do that, good, success, because you at least have something to discuss about. But that does not mean that you need to give into pressure to report a shorter time when for example, you are when you want to appease to higher ups. It is more professional to be honest about your estimates. I really believe that this will be the time it takes to implement something. We have a tendency to be better at estimating when we're estimating smaller things, but we should never forget about the bigger picture. Even sometimes just a high-level estimate can already be good enough, and then you can compare your high-level estimate with the detailed estimation that you've done. Share these estimates with peers, with colleagues, with management, with the business, and then they can give feedback on you. So for example, when you estimate something, you think, oh, this is really complex, we need to do whatever functionality, and you ask it to your colleague and he says, oh, but at the previous company I worked for, I did it in this way, and it's actually not that difficult, so you get immediate feedback and you can do better estimations. And then finally, regarding estimations, it's reviewing. This will take some time, but after you've delivered a project, review your estimates, because this will make you better at estimating in the future. So we thought it was going to take X days, and it actually took us X plus 5. Okay, I will keep that in mind for the next time that I'm doing something similar. If you estimate it as a team, for example, you can use sprint retrospectives to go over the estimated time that you did. Interfacing with the outside world. I need to have a slide with skittles on it, right? As a technical lead, you're probably very technical in nature. But you will also need to communicate ideas with non-technical people. So for example, if I have a discussion within the Kubernetes project that I'm doing right now, and I'm discussing with my colleague, oh, we have a problem because the service is not picked up and our pod doesn't auto-scale, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. If I tell that to the customer, he will just be looking at me like, what? So you should try to use analogies and use terms that non-technical people can relate to. You should try to work very closely with customers and try to detect the requirements from them. And making sure that you map their requirements to whatever is being implemented to make sure that you don't build something that they're not interested in. Be the go-to guy, go-to girl for management, the customer, and other stakeholders. Now, as a technical lead, I don't think you should be the single point of contact for everything, because like I said earlier, you don't get any work done, and you will also be a liability for the project. A personal story I'd like to share. a couple of years ago, one of the first large projects that I did as a technical lead, we had a pretty large code base. There were a lot of mathematical algorithms in there, but it was still pretty easy going. There was like no real big deadlines, so just continuously adding functionality. Customer was happy, but at a certain moment, there's like the fairy tale project. It had all the latest technology, had the best people, he had they had no budget limitations, which was always really cool. And I really wanted to get that job, so I applied for it and I got it. I was really happy. But then I found out that I couldn't do it because there was nobody to replace me on my previous project. So I believe that you should try to make sure that the developers, the people in your team, that you share a lot of information with them, that you include them in certain discussions, not in everything, because in general developers don't like to be interrupted all the time, but still make sure that everybody can work together on what you're doing. So don't be the single point of contact, but try to be like the first point of contact. The magic word, no. So in general, I have a tendency to say yes to everything. So yes, we can deploy that. Yes, we can build it. But as a technical lead, you don't need to please everyone. You represent the entire team. And your discussions, your decisions can have a big impact on how the team works and how they prioritize work. So if people will come to you with 3 more slides, with crazy requirements, just say no. Last point, facilitate agile work. I was kind of surprised by the number of people who are not working agile over here. I think you should. This is not a talk on agile, so I will not be explaining all of these. But the thing is, what's very important within agile working is you get quick feedback loops, short development cycles, and you can get something out to the customer very quickly. This will work better when business is involved as well. But even when they're not involved, maybe you should assign like a proxy product owner. This will likely be you. But then you can do agile and work with tools like Jira or Agile Manager and things like that. Last but not least, it's not only about facilitating agile, but it's like facilitating an awesome team. Give ownership, show trust. You have the responsibility to make sure that everybody in the team is motivated and that you have an awesome team. Thank you. I think I have some time for questions. So if you have any questions, I will also go to the speakers lounge afterwards. You can find me there as well. Yes? The differences between a technical lead and a solution architect. I think that's an interesting question, but a lot of that depends on how you define solution architect. Generally, solution architects is somebody who needs to work on solutioning a certain problem, while a technical lead, in my opinion, is somebody who's just part of the team and works with the team every day and makes sure that the team operates correctly. Solution architect is more somebody who tries to sell an idea to the customer and is not actively involved in the team.
Okay, any more questions?
Are you still a single point of contact for business or external teams?
I try to avoid that as much as possible. It kind of depends on the maturity of your team. So if you have a fairly new project and people are just like starting to gather around the project, the application that you're building, you will be most likely be the single point of contact of the team at that point. But you should try to make sure that you bring some of the team with you if there are certain discussions. So you should try to avoid being the single point of contact, but maybe be like the first point of contact, just to avoid that everybody gets like interrupted all the time.
Thanks.
Okay, any more questions?
Over there is one. If you just shout, I'll repeat the question. Okay, so the question was, how does technical leadership works together in agile projects where all the developers are equal and you, like he said, don't need a technical lead in the team. That's actually the start of my presentation. If you have people who all work openly together and always can find a consensus, then the person being a technical lead might be less necessary, but the role, the responsibilities are still very important. You will need somebody to mitigate things like that. I also believe that if you have very open discussions about everything, that there will also be some kind of like alpha males coming in between and make sure that the people who are more alpha males or women, I don't know how to say that, alpha women, the guy with the big mouth, or girl. Yeah, you know what I mean, right? And you will not give the opportunity to the junior people in the team. And you should really make sure that if you have junior people, that they get coached, that they get opportunities, and things like that as well.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Last question. I will be at the speakers lounge if you have more questions.
How would you lead when working remotely?
Excellent question. I actually like to take some time for that. I have worked with a couple of offshore teams, so that's remotely, it's similar. So I think that you need some kind of instant messaging. You will also need the possibility to do conference calls, things like that, and you will need a lot of trust in what people are doing. I think working remotely is perfectly possible, but it will need, I think you need mature teams to work effectively remotely and use the tooling available. If you have a CI/CD pipeline, you can like gamificate things, and if somebody breaks the build, you can like say something, okay, next time that we meet up together, you're the one who buys the first beer, things like that. Just have some fun.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. And I would like to remind all of you to vote for the speaker in the RigaDevDays app. Thank you.